Okay, so I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about this for a second before we go any further. Have you ever looked at your trading results? Not just one trade, not just one bad week, but your overall results over months, and thought to yourself, why does this keep happening? Like, you know what you're supposed to do. You've read the books, you've watched the videos, you understand the concepts, and yet somehow the same patterns keep showing up, the same mistakes. Yeah, the same emotional decisions, the same feeling of watching yourself do the wrong thing almost in slow motion, like you're standing outside your own body going, no, don't do that, and doing it anyway. If that sounds familiar, I want you to stay with me because what I'm about to share might be the most honest answer to that question you've ever heard. There was a man named Dr. Ari Kiev, and he had a theory, a very specific, very uncomfortable theory about why traders, even smart, experienced, the genuinely talented traders, keep losing in ways that have nothing to do with their analysis. And his theory wasn't popular when he first started talking about it because it didn't blame the market, it didn't blame bad luck, and it didn't offer a new strategy or a better indicator. It pointed the finger somewhere that most people really don't want to look. And the traders who were willing to look there, the ones who actually sat with what Kiev was saying and let it land, they changed. And not overnight, but they changed in a way that stuck. And that is what this entire video is about. So if you're new here to Mind Over Markets, subscribe right now and hit that bell, because this is exactly the kind of conversation we have every single week. The real stuff, the uncomfortable stuff, the psychological layer of trading that most channels never go near. And if you're already part of this community, you already know. Let's get into it. So let's start with a question that might feel a little uncomfortable. Why do smart people lose money in the markets? Because they do. Consistently, repeatedly. People with MBAs, people with engineering degrees, people who are analytically gifted, people who have studied charts for years. They blow accounts. They make the same emotional mistakes over and over. They know better, and they do it anyway. If this were simply a knowledge problem, and then every person who read enough books and studied enough patterns would eventually become a consistently profitable trader. But that's not what happens. The knowledge doesn't fix it. The strategy doesn't fix it. The new indicator doesn't fix it. Something else is going on. And Ari Kiev spent decades of his professional life figuring out exactly what that something else was. Kiev was a psychiatrist by training. He graduated from Harvard Medical School, and he spent years studying human behavior under extreme conditions. Not in trading initially, but in athletics. He worked with Olympic athletes. He understood what peak performance looked like at the highest levels of human competition, and more importantly, he understood what got in the way of it. He understood that the difference between an athlete who performs brilliantly in training and collapses in competition versus an athlete who rises to the moment when it matters most, almost never comes down to physical ability. It comes down to what's happening in their mind in the pressure moment. And when Kiev eventually found his way onto the trading floors of Wall Street, when he started working directly with the traders at SAC Capital, sitting next to them, watching them in real time, he immediately recognized something. The trading floor was the most intense psychological performance arena he had ever encountered, every single day. Thus, these traders were making high-stakes decisions under enormous uncertainty with their own money, their firm's money, their careers, and their sense of self, all on the line simultaneously. It was like being in Olympic competition every day with no off-season, no breaks, no room to reset, just pressure, decision, result, pressure, decision, result, endlessly. And what Kiev saw playing out on those floors was not primarily a story about skill. It was a story about psychology. Yet it was a story about fear, how it hides, how it disguises itself, how it takes over the decision-making process without the trader even realizing it's happening. The traders who were struggling, who were inconsistent, who kept making the same self-destructive mistakes. They weren't bad at analysis. Most of them were genuinely brilliant. What they were doing was operating from a mental state that was fundamentally incompatible with excellent performance. And Kiev gave that mental state a name. He called it fear. And he spent his career teaching traders to recognize it, to understand it, and ultimately to replace it with something else entirely. Here is the core of what Kiev discovered. And I want you to really sit with this before we move on. There are two fundamentally different mental states from which a trader can make decisions. The first state is driven by fear, by the need to avoid pain, avoid loss, avoid embarrassment, avoid being wrong. And the second state is driven by commitment, by a clear, deliberate intention about what you are trying to create and why. And the extraordinary thing Kiev found is that these two states, which can look almost identical from the outside, produce completely different decisions, completely different behaviors, and over time, completely different results. And the shift from one to the other, from operating out of fear to operating out of genuine commitment, is what he came to believe was the single most important transformation a trader could make. This is his number one rule: not a strategy, not a setup, not a risk management formula, a mental shift, a reorientation of the entire relationship between the trader and their own decision-making. Now, I want to make sure we're being concrete here because abstract concepts don't change lives. Real understanding does. So let's talk about what fear-based trading actually looks like. Not as a philosophical idea, but as specific, recognizable behaviors that you might see in yourself every single week. Fear-based trading is what's happening when you take a trade. Not because your plan tells you to, but because you've been watching the market move without you for an hour, and the anxiety of missing out has become unbearable. That's fear. Fear of missing out. A fear of being irrelevant to the move. Fear of watching other people make money while you sit on the sidelines. And it feels exactly like conviction in the moment. It feels like you're making a confident, informed decision. But the thing actually driving the entry is an emotional itch that needs scratching. Fear-based trading is also what happens when you cut a winning trade too early. You get in, the trade starts working, you're up a decent amount, and then that little voice starts. It's saying, what if it reverses? What if I give it all back? What if I end up at break even or worse after being up this much? And you click the exit button before the trade has actually reached your target, locking in a small gain while leaving most of the move on the table. And you tell yourself you were being prudent, you were managing risk. But what you were actually managing was your discomfort. You couldn't sit with the uncertainty of a live, profitable position. Yet the fear of loss was stronger than your commitment to the plan. Fear-based trading is what drives you to hold a losing trade far longer than your rules allow, adding more reasons to stay in, adjusting your thesis after the fact, moving your stop further away, all because closing the trade means admitting you were wrong. And being wrong feels catastrophic when your identity is attached to being a good trader. So you hold, and you hope, and you tell yourself a story about why this time is different, until eventually you get out, usually at a far worse price than you should have, having violated every rule you set for yourself, feeling hollow and frustrated and somehow confused about how this keeps happening. Fear-based trading is what happens when you have a big losing day and you immediately jump back in with a larger position trying to make back what you lost before the day is over. Revenge trading, people call it. But it's not really about revenge on the market. The market doesn't know you exist. It's about the unbearable feeling of sitting with a loss. It's about the emotional need to make the pain stop as quickly as possible, and that need overrides everything: your risk limits, your plan, your judgment, your better instincts. You're not trading a setup at that point. You're trading your own emotional desperation, and the market has no mercy for desperation. These are not rare, unusual behaviors. These are the default behaviors of the human mind under financial pressure. And this is why Kiev's observation was so important, because he was watching these patterns not in retail traders who were new and inexperienced, but in professionals who had been in markets for years, who had extensive training, who were surrounded by risk infrastructure, who knew better. The knowledge was there, the rules were there, the experience was there, and still, fear was running the show. So let's talk about the other side. Let's talk about what commitment-based trading actually looks like in practice, because this is where the shift becomes real. Commitment, the way Kiev defined it, is not enthusiasm. It's not motivation. It's not the fired up feeling you get after watching an inspiring video or reading a great trading book. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings come and go. You can feel motivated at 9 in the morning and completely demoralized by noon. Well, commitment is something else. Commitment is a decision that you have made about who you are going to be and how you are going to act, independent of how you feel in any given moment. It's the thing that holds when the feeling isn't there. It's the anchor that keeps you steady when the emotional weather of the market is trying to blow you off course. And the traders Kiev worked with, who had made this shift, who were genuinely operating from commitment rather than fear, had a very different quality to their decision making. When they took a trade, it was because the conditions they had defined in advance were present. Not because they felt like it, not because they were bored, not because they had FOMO, because the conditions they committed to were present. When the trade moved against them, they exited at their predetermined level, and not because it felt good, it never feels good, but because they had committed to that behavior in advance and they were holding themselves to that commitment. When a trade worked and hit their target, they exited there too, not because they weren't greedy for more, but because they had committed to the process. And the process said, this is the exit. And when they had a losing day, they stopped trading when they hit their daily loss limit, closed their platform, and walked away. Because that was the commitment, and the commitment held even when every instinct was screaming at them to keep going. From the outside, this kind of trading can look boring. It lacks the drama of the big revenge trade that somehow works, the thrill of the improvised exit that locks in a perfect top tick. But over hundreds of trading days, over months and years, now the compounding difference between these two approaches is the difference between an account that grows steadily and one that cycles endlessly between hope and devastation. Now, one of the most important things Kiev said, something that separates his thinking from a lot of generic trading psychology advice, is that the goal is not to eliminate emotion. This is a critical point, and I don't want to rush past it. There's a very common idea in trading circles that the ideal trader is basically a robot, emotionless, cold, mechanical, no feeling, no hesitation, just pure logical execution. And Kiev explicitly rejected this idea because he understood that emotion is not the enemy. Emotion is information. The feeling of fear before a trade can be telling you something important, that your position size is too large, that you haven't fully thought through the risk. Yes, that this setup doesn't actually meet your criteria, even though you've been trying to convince yourself it does. The feeling of excitement can signal that you found something genuinely good, or it can signal that you're getting caught up in hype. Discomfort in a live position can be a signal to look more carefully, or it can just be the normal discomfort of holding uncertainty. The goal is not to kill these signals. Now, the goal is to stop letting them make your decisions for you without your awareness and consent. The goal is what Kiev called the witness perspective, the ability to observe what you're feeling in real time, to acknowledge it, to consider what it might be telling you, and then to consciously choose your action based on your commitment rather than on the automatic pull of the emotion. This is a skill, a learnable, trainable skill. And like any skill, it requires practice, repetition, and honest self-assessment. But the traders who develop it gain something that no strategy, no indicator, no edge in the market can give them. They gain agency over their own minds under pressure. Let me tell you about something Kiev observed that he called the trap of the past. It's one of the patterns he saw most consistently in traders who were stuck. And I think when you hear it, you'll recognize it immediately. Then the trap of the past is the way our previous trading experiences, but specifically our losses and our wins, reach forward in time and distort our present decision-making. Here's how it works. You took a trade 3 weeks ago. It looked perfect. All your criteria were met. You sized it correctly. You set your stop. Everything was right. And then it hit your stop exactly, reversed, and went on to do exactly what you expected without you. And now 3 weeks later, you see a similar setup. Objectively, it looks just as good. Your criteria are met, but there's a voice in your head, quiet but insistent, saying, remember last time? Remember how that worked out? And you hesitate. You size it smaller, or you don't take it at all. You let the wound from 3 weeks ago make the decision for you today. That is the trap of the past. You are not trading the current market, you are trading your memory of a previous one. The same trap works in the opposite direction. You had a phenomenal run 2 months ago. 3 weeks of almost nothing going wrong, positions working beautifully, your confidence sky high. And now the market has shifted. The conditions are different, your recent trades have been more mixed. But you're still operating with the position sizes and the risk tolerance of 2 months ago, because the ghost of that winning streak is still influencing your decisions. You're not trading what's in front of you. You're trying to live up to a previous version of yourself. And that gap between who you're trying to be and who you actually are in this market right now is where the mistakes happen. Kiev's prescription for the trap of the past was always the same. Return to the commitment. Strip away the emotional weight of previous trades, whether they were wins or losses, and come back to the present with a clear, forward-looking intention. What am I trying to create today? What does excellent trading look like for me right now in these conditions? What am I committed to, regardless of what happened last week or last month? This is not easy. The brain naturally reaches back for pattern and precedent. But with practice, you can learn to notice when you're making a decision based on past emotion rather than present reality, and in that noticing, you have the power to choose differently. Something else Kiev wrote about extensively, and something I think about a lot in terms of its implications for traders at all levels, is the relationship between self-worth and trading performance. This might be the most psychologically dangerous pattern of all, and it's one that often develops quietly without the trader even realizing it's happening. It starts innocuously. You get into trading, you work hard, you develop skills, you start to see some results, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, your sense of who you are starts to get tangled up with how you're doing in the markets. Being a good trader stops being something you do and starts being something you are. Your identity gets attached to your P&L, which means that a losing trade stops being just a financial event. It becomes evidence about your worth as a person. It's a crack in the foundation of who you believe yourself to be. And when that happens, losing trades don't just cost money. They cost psychological safety. That they trigger something closer to shame than disappointment. And shame, unlike disappointment or frustration, does not motivate constructive behavior. Shame makes people hide. It makes them double down on bad positions to avoid acknowledging the loss. It makes them take reckless risks to restore their sense of competence as quickly as possible. It makes them lie to themselves over and over with increasing sophistication about what's really happening in their trading. And Kiev saw this pattern in people who were extraordinarily talented, people who should have been thriving. And what he found was that the identity attachment to trading performance made them fragile in a very specific way. They could handle winning, but they could not handle losing with equanimity. And since losing is an inevitable, unavoidable, mathematically guaranteed part of trading, and their inability to handle it with equanimity meant they were always one bad run away from a psychological crisis. The solution Kiev proposed was not to care less about trading. Caring deeply is fine, even necessary. The solution was to decouple your identity from your results. To build your sense of self around your commitment and your process, things you can control, rather than around outcomes you cannot fully control. When you're committed to excellent process, a losing trade is not an indictment of who you are. It's data. It's information. It's a natural part of the process you have committed to, and you receive it as such. Extract whatever learning it offers, and move on with your identity intact. This decoupling between identity and outcome is genuinely difficult. It goes against some very deep psychological wiring, but it is also one of the most liberating things a trader can experience. When you no longer need any single trade to validate your worth, you make better decisions. You can exit losers without it feeling like a personal defeat. You can miss a setup without spiraling into self-criticism. You can have a bad week without catastrophizing about your entire future as a trader. The emotional noise drops significantly, and in that quieter space, clearer thinking becomes possible. Now let me talk about something that almost nobody discusses in trading psychology content: but that Kiev saw as one of the most insidious forces in the trading world, the problem with winning. Yes, you read that right. Winning creates its own psychological traps, and in some ways they are more dangerous than losing, precisely because nobody warns you about them. Here's the pattern. A trader has an extraordinary run. Let's say over the course of 2 months everything clicks. The positions work. The sizing is right. The exits are clean. Yet the results are better than anything they've produced before. And in the aftermath of that run, something shifts in their psychology. Something subtle, but consequential. Their reference point for what normal performance looks like has been permanently altered by the exceptional period. They start expecting that level of performance as a baseline. And when the inevitable reversion comes, when the market shifts and their edge doesn't fire as cleanly and results become more ordinary, they experience it as failure. They start pressing, trying to force the results back to the exceptional level. Or they become paralyzed, afraid to trade and give back what they've built. Or they become arrogant, dismissing valid risk signals because the recent success has convinced them they have a special gift that protects them. All of these responses, though they look different on the surface, are the same thing underneath. They are fear responses to a change in external conditions. The winning streak created a new psychological comfort zone, and now that zone has contracted, and the fear of operating outside it is distorting every decision. Kiev's answer, again, it was to return to the commitment, to strip away the emotional weight of the exceptional run, and come back to the question of what excellent trading looks like, regardless of recent results. The commitment is not to a number. The commitment is to a standard of behavior, and that standard remains constant whether you're in the middle of your best month or your worst. Let's talk about something very practical now. The actual structure Kiev recommended for building commitment into a daily trading practice. Because everything we've discussed so far has been conceptual, and concepts without structure tend to fade. Kiev believed that commitment was not just a mindset, it was a practice. Something you did deliberately every single day, before the market opened and after it closed. Before the trading day, Kiev's traders would go through what he called a commitment ritual. And I want to be clear about what this was and what it wasn't. It was not a motivational pep talk. It was not visualization of winning trades. It was a specific, honest internal process. The trader would begin by reviewing their overarching intention, not just their P&L target, but the deeper vision of what kind of trader they were building themselves to be. They would then state clearly in writing what they were committed to that day, not what they hoped would happen, not what they wanted the market to do, what they were committed to doing, regardless of what the market did, their risk limits, their process for taking entries, their conditions for staying in or getting out, and then, this part is crucial, they would do an honest check-in with their own emotional state. How am I coming into today? Am I carrying frustration from yesterday? Am I overconfident from a good week? Am I tired? Or distracted, anxious about something in my personal life that might bleed into my trading? Naming the emotional state before the market opens doesn't make it go away, but it makes it visible. And visible things have far less power over you than invisible ones. After the trading day, the debrief. And again, this was not a P&L review. It was a process review. The question was never simply, did I make money today? The question was, did I trade in accordance with my commitments today? Yet where did I follow my plan? And where did I drift? And when I drifted, because drifting is human and inevitable, what was the emotional state I was in when it happened? What was I feeling? What story was I telling myself? This reflective practice, done consistently and honestly over weeks and months, builds an extraordinary level of self-knowledge. You start to see your own patterns with a clarity that is uncomfortable at first and then liberating. You know exactly which situations make you vulnerable. You know which emotional states impair your judgment. You know the conditions under which you perform at your best. And you can start deliberately creating more of those conditions. Kiev also talked extensively about the role of accountability, and this is something that retail traders tend to underestimate badly. He didn't just work with traders in one-on-one sessions, he worked with them in groups. And the reason for that was specific and deliberate. There is something uniquely powerful about stating your commitments to another human being and then having to report back on whether you honored them. You can lie to yourself with remarkable creativity and sophistication. We all can. It is one of the great human talents. But it is much harder to lie to someone else who was there, who heard you make the commitment, who is now looking you in the eye asking what happened. Yet that social accountability creates a level of psychological pressure that no amount of solo journaling can fully replicate. For most traders watching this, you don't have a Ari Kiev in your corner. You don't have a group of peers who are holding you accountable every day. But that doesn't mean accountability is impossible. It means you have to build it deliberately. A trading journal used with real honesty is a powerful tool. Not a journal where you record your entries and exits. A journal where you record your intentions before the session and then honestly compare them to your actual behavior after the session. That gap, the space between what you said you were going to do and what you actually did, is where all the psychological information lives. That gap is the work. Every time you notice it, every time you sit with the discomfort of seeing your own patterns clearly, you are doing the equivalent of the work Kiev's traders did on those trading floors. There's one more layer of Kiev's thinking that I want to bring in, because I think it might be the most philosophically rich part of his entire framework, and it connects trading psychology to something much larger about what it means to live and act with intention. Kiev had a concept he came back to again and again in his books and in his coaching. He called it living in the future. And at first, that phrase sounds almost counterintuitive. Aren't we supposed to be present? Yeah, isn't the whole point to be in the moment? But what Kiev meant by it was something very specific and very powerful. Most fear-based decisions are anchored in time, but anchored backwards. They are reactions to the past. The loss that happened last week, the embarrassing trade from last month, the painful memory of a previous market cycle that wiped out a significant part of an account. Fear drags you backward into those experiences and uses them to color every present decision. The alternative Kiev proposed was not to ignore the past and pretend it didn't happen. It was to consciously orient your attention toward the future you are creating, to have such a clear, vivid, committed vision of what you are building as a trader, as a professional, as a person, that your present decisions get evaluated not against your past failures, but against that future vision. Does this action, this trade, this risk decision, did this emotional response take me toward the trader I'm committed to becoming? Or does it take me away from that? This reorientation of temporal attention sounds simple. It is not simple to implement, but when it genuinely takes hold, it changes the entire texture of decision-making. Instead of being driven by the avoidance of past pain, you are being pulled forward by a positive vision of what you are creating. And that difference between moving away from something and moving toward something is one of the most fundamental distinctions in human motivation. People who move away from things tend to stop when the pain recedes. People who move toward things keep going because the vision hasn't been reached yet. In trading terms, people who are motivated purely by avoiding losses tend to trade defensively, inconsistently, and without genuine engagement. But people who are motivated by a clear vision of what they are building tend to trade with more patience, more consistency, and more resilience when things don't go their way. I want to tell you something that Kiev noted about the broader effects of this psychological work, because I think it speaks to why his ideas are worth engaging with even beyond their direct application to trading. Yet the traders who genuinely made the shift from fear-based to commitment-based operation didn't just become better traders. They became different people in their lives outside trading too. Because the psychological work required to trade from commitment, the self-awareness, the accountability, the ability to sit with discomfort without letting it drive your behavior, the practice of acting from your highest intentions rather than your lowest fears. These are not market-specific skills. They are human skills. They transfer. Traders who did this work found it changing their relationships, their health, their ability to set meaningful goals, and actually pursue them. The trading floor for these people became a laboratory for developing a kind of psychological mastery that improved every area of their lives. This is, I think, one of the most profound things about taking trading psychology seriously. The market is pitiless. It gives you immediate, unambiguous, yet financially consequential feedback on the quality of your thinking and the integrity of your decision-making. You cannot charm it. You cannot fake it. You cannot perform competence without having it, at least not for long. And that brutality, as uncomfortable as it is also an extraordinary gift because it means the market is one of the most honest mirrors available to a human being. If you are willing to look into it honestly, to take the feedback it gives you and actually examine what your behavior says about your psychology, you will learn things about yourself that most people go their entire lives without discovering. And that self-knowledge, once gained, is yours. It doesn't go away when the market closes. So let's bring this home, because I want to leave you with something you can actually use starting today, not next month, and not when you've finished reading another 3 books on trading psychology. Today, the shift from fear-based to commitment-based trading begins with a single honest question that you ask yourself before every trade, before every session, before every significant decision you make in the market. The question is this: is this action coming from my commitment or is it coming from my fear? Not from your analysis, not from your system, but from you, from this part of you that has clearly and deliberately decided what kind of trader you are going to be and what behaviors you are going to embody. If the action aligns with that commitment, take it. If it doesn't, don't, and no matter how compelling the story you're telling yourself about why you should. That question, asked honestly and consistently, will do more for your trading than any indicator, any strategy, any system ever will. Because it is not a question about the market. It is a question about you. And you ultimately are the only variable in your trading that you have any real control over. The market will do whatever it does. Other traders will do whatever they do. News, events, volatility, randomness, these are all outside your control. The only thing you can control is the mental state you bring to the decision and the integrity with which you hold your own commitments under pressure. This is what Kiev spent his life teaching. Not a technique, not a formula, a way of being in relationship with your own trading. Honest, intentional, accountable, forward-looking. A way of showing up in the market that is grounded in something stable enough to hold when everything external is uncertain and moving. That stable ground is commitment. And the traders who find it, who genuinely, deeply, behaviorally make this shift, are the ones who make it. Not because the market stops being hard, it never stops being hard, but because they stop being their own worst enemy inside of it. Thank you for spending this time with me today on Mind Over Markets. If this video gave you something real to think about, something that actually landed, hit the like button right now. It tells the algorithm that this kind of deep, serious content matters, and it helps us reach more traders who need to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. We're building something here that is genuinely different from most of what's out there. Honest, in-depth explorations of the psychological side of trading that most channels won't touch. Every week, a new deep dive. And I don't want you to miss what's coming next. Until then, trade with intention, not with fear. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.